Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. I want to talk about math and manga. Okay, so here's the thing, right? With manga, right? It's been around for quite some time, and it's something that's inherently mathematical. For starters, right? You're drawing like these characters and these objects that all have shape, and you're trying to also convey motion. And these two things alone make manga mathematical. And I think that's interesting, right? But it goes so much further than that. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to describe some ways in which math is used in manga and how that leads to some other things and just my experiences with it in general. Because recently I made a video on math and anime. I'll leave that in the description along with a lot of other things, and so I wanted to follow that up with this. All right, so when it comes to manga, right? Like I said, right, you're drawing characters, you're drawing objects. And when it comes to those things, right, there's math inherently built in them because you're dealing with shapes. Um, and right, and then not only are you dealing with those shapes, you're dealing with ratios, you're dealing with scaling, you're drawing these different objects and these different people and making sure things look right. You're also dealing with the line work, the coloring, right? The writing and how everything fits onto that page, right? And so there's math in all of that, and there's math on the panels and how you play around with those panels, right? Like, because you could, have something that's more traditional and you're dealing with these panels and making sure everything is in them, or you might play around with like getting out of those panels. Either way, there's math involved. And so not only is there math involved in the shapes, not only is there math involved in like the inking and the line work as a whole and the coloring, but there's math in plotting out the story and math in how you're getting it out week to week if that's something that you're doing, right? Because like I think about Dragon Ball, and it's like that went on for a while, right? The manga went on for 11 years. Um and what, we have 42 chapters. Um and it was weekly, and I don't know how many breaks were taken, if at all, but like it's kind of crazy to think about, right? And I use that as an example, so it's like because Dragon Ball is a big part of my life, but also it's like that idea like, hey, if you have a week to do something, you have to plot that out, right? So there's math in the time it takes to produce a manga, and there's math in how much money it makes, how much money it takes, and then you got to figure, right? It's not uncommon for manga to have anime adaptations. In fact, it's the norm, right? And sometimes you'll see the reverse where you have an anime and then a manga. But no matter how you talk about it, the idea is like you're reaching new audiences, you're getting more money in. And so not only will you see like mangas get converted to anime and vice versa, but you also see like different toys, different games, and each of those things has a lot of math in them too. And you might hear like radio dramas, um, just any number of things like light novels, whatever the case may be, novelizations as a whole. But there's math in all of that, and I think that's pretty cool. Um, and then there's just math within the universes that the manga is trying to depict, right? As well as in like any scaling for like any action anime and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, right, you're gonna be depicting these moments in this world, and you're gonna be dealing with motion. You're gonna be doing page to page, so your idea is to like get across that motion, and there's different tricks to that, right? So you might use, like, if someone's moving really fast, you might use speed lines, or you might have some character moving that's supposed to be moving fast, um, move a lot and have different positions compared to a character that is slower, or you might actually have a character that's slower moving fast and have someone that's moving faster move slower to indicate that they're way faster than the other person, if that makes sense, right? It's like compared to the other person, it's like it looks like they're barely moving. They're moving that fast, if that makes sense. Um, but it's just like in either direction, though, it's interesting because you're conveying that motion, you're conveying that speed, um, and you're comparing characters and their positions and all that stuff. And I think that's interesting. And back to Dragon Ball, what I think is fascinating about that is like there's so much motion in that series, right? It's all about fighting, and so there's math in getting that across, math and the power levels and the power scaling. And we can get a little bit more into that, and I talked about it in the anime video. I talked about it in a lot of videos actually, but the whole thing I think was interesting with Dragon Ball is like trying to get that speed across in different ways. and because it's like some of the examples I might have sorry, some of the examples I said is like true, and there's just so many tricks that you could use for that, and I think that's awesome with power levels and power scaling. With power levels, ideas like or battle power, whatever you prefer, the idea is like to get across that someone is more powerful, but that's only part of it, right? Because you're gauging someone's power based on a number, and using a scouter, but while that could convey proper information as far as most people are concerned, it doesn't take a lot of things into account, right? It doesn't take into account that some people could hide their power, right? Or some people can unleash it in bursts. Or some people can transform, as we'll later see, right? There's so much that it doesn't take into account. And I think that's fascinating and just is mathematical in its very nature. And the Dragon Ball community doesn't let that sort of stuff go. And I find it fascinating because it's like maybe they like math way more than they think. And some people are, in fact, way more upfront about that. And I think that's cool. But my whole thing, though, is just like math can be used in a number of ways. It can be used for world building. It could be useful for making a manga world seem more like our own. And then there's just so much math in the behind the scenes stuff, right? And making the panels flow together and getting out that manga in a weekly fashion and and adapting that manga. And all the things that I said, it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? And I feel like you could have so many more discussions about that. But my big thing was just to say, like, hey, um, manga is interesting. It's mathematical in its very nature, and anime is an extension of that, is too. And from my experience with manga, like, I cannot remember when I first read it. Um, Probably like in middle school or like early high school, and then kind of sporadically over the years. But it's kind of like interesting because you have to kind of get used to like reading a different way, which is fascinating. But I don't feel like that's too hard to get used to, and it's just kind of fascinating to see like what this anime was based off of, or if you going in the other direction, like interesting to see like how some anime is adapted to manga. But no matter how you cut it, right, it's a big part of art, in part because of itself, but also the other things that are connected to it. And I think that's fascinating. I think that's cool. And yeah, I wanted to talk about that a little bit. That being said, I'll see you in the future.